Welcome to the Inprint online reading series presented in association with the Inprint Margaret Root Brown reading series. I'm Rich Levy, Executive Director of Inprint, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Tony Hoagland. Tony is a faculty member of the University of Houston Creative Writing Program and the author of several wonderful collections of poetry, including Sweet Will, Donkey Gospel, What Narcissism Means to Me, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and his latest, Unknown Persons of the Late Honda Dynasty. He is also the author of a collection of essays, Real Sophistication, Essays on Poetry and Craft. He has received the Mark Twain Award, the Jackson Poetry Prize, and the Hardison Prize for teaching and writing. According to Marie Howe, Tony Hoagland writes from deep inside the American Empire, hilarious, searing poems that break your heart so fast you hardly notice you're standing knee-deep in a pool of implications. They are of the moment, right now, the present that we're already homesick for. These poems value humor and surprise and traffic in what is, but shouldn't be, unspoken. Please welcome Tony Hoagland.
I'm going to read some poems that have something to do with Texas and Houston. And the first poem I'm going to read is called "Because It Is Houston," which is also the first line. And it's about the challenges and the advantages of being a poet in, forgive me for saying so, an unpoetic place. Superficially unpoetic place. I actually think of it as a target-rich environment. So the poem is "Because It Is Houston." Because it is Houston, the streetlights have to take the place usually reserved for the moon in the poem. And the traffic in the background, with its roar and surge, stands in for the ocean, tossing wrecks like driftwood on the shore. Because it is Houston, the tight little blonde talking on her cell phone while backing her SUV at high speed through the parking lot is a respected citizen. And the gnarled, serpentine, stretched out limbs of oaks above certain shady boulevards suggest that even ugly can be beautiful. Because it is Houston, a moist wind blowing from the south at dawn carries the faint petrochemical bouquet from the landfills of our fathers and the landfills of their fathers. How sweet it smells. A morning shower has knocked down blossoms from the honeysuckle bush into the grass like little ivory trumpets. Because there is no one better qualified around. Because it is Houston. You are the one who gets to kneel upon the buckled sidewalk and look at them in silence. I remember when I first got here that every morning I would go out of my house and I could tell when a tanker had overturned, there was a chemical spill on I-45, and I didn't realize at the time that was really a form of nature, and that I would, really get to be, a connoisseur of aromas of that nature. This is another poem. It's also about, it's kind of about the oil industry, I guess you could say. It's also kind of about a smell, because when I was a kid, I remember, like a lot of you, being at the gas station when the car was being filled up and thinking, I like that smell. I don't care what they say about carcinogens. So this is a poem about, and this is a poem about also that thing you learned when you were in grade school about how oil all came from the bodies of dinosaurs, which had been, pressed into these layers of shale. The poem is called "Dinosaur." What a wild time the oil had, coming up from its crypt beneath the ocean floor, where it had been contained for eons in the dark, aged and filtered, brewed and cooled in the abyss. Exquisite black espresso, strange even to itself, bruised from its innumerable transformations. Dinosaur blood, as children we were told. And when the old green Ford pulled up at the Texaco, I watched the juice pulsing through the black umbilicus into the tank and thought about the hundreds of brontosauruses crammed down there under the parking lots and interstates, bleeding thick black brontosaurus blood. How someday they would wake and push their way up through catacombs and fissures, seeking their release. Even back then, there would be a reckoning. The dinosaurs were coming back. They were on their way. Even when we were kids, building castles on the beach, or sitting in the back seat of the car, strapped in for the long ride home, as the friendly service station man named Bill, in the cool green uniform, pulled the nozzle out and screwed the cap on tight. And I just want you to know that Texaco is just a fictional oil company, not a real one in that poem. So this is a poem about, another kind of, petrochemical that lives underneath the surface crust of America. It's sort of about race and our great dark shadow secret that everybody knows. And this is a poem about watching a sort of wonderful PBS special in which the fabulous African American intellectual Henry Louis Gates found out it was a special about DNA, and they were analyzing DNA and finding out basically what the country of your origin was. And Henry Louis Gates, who's a great man, great American, and he found out where his blood said his ancestors were from. And because we're all deeply fascinated about race, even as we avoid making eye contact with each other, the program was fascinating to me. And the poem's called Hinge. It's about ancestry and all the stories that are behind us. Last night on TV, the light brown African American professor looked at the printout analysis of his own DNA and learned that he was mostly Irish. I can't go back to Africa now, he thought, controlling the expression on his face, his big moment on screen already turning out different than he had imagined. Nor would he ever be able to say the sentence, "I be at the crib," with the same brotherly ease as before. I was tired from work, and I wanted to turn off the television and go to bed, but I couldn't stop watching that transformation. The bones in his face rearranging, his freckles becoming explicable, thanks to the hinge on an 18th century door between the kitchen of a Massachusetts merchant and the southernmost room where a slave woman slept. Thanks to the macrame of chromosomes and the electron microscope and the longing for knowledge, which sometimes makes things more confusing than they were before. That's how I feel while I watch, as if eavesdropping on the family next door, pressing my ear to the wall, slowly starting to make out the words, not certain why I am so interested. My ear glued to the wall. The merchant raising a tiny oil can and tilting it to squeeze 3 drops into the hinge to keep it quiet. And I'll read a kind of family poem now. This is a poem about talking to my aging father, long distance, at an earlier point in my extended adolescence, and sort of realizing that he's an old man, and that being pissed off at him for what happened many years ago was no longer appropriate. So it's a sort of poem about it's a kind of back-asswards apology, and it's called Phone Call. Maybe I overdid it when I called my father an enemy of humanity. That might have been a little strongly put, a slight over-exaggeration, an immoderate description of the person who, at that moment, 2,000 miles away, holding the telephone receiver 6 inches from his ear, must have regretted paying for my therapy. What I meant was that my father was an enemy of my humanity. And what I meant behind that was that my father was split into two people, one of them living deep inside of me, like a bad king or an incurable disease, blighting my crops, striking down my herds, poisoning my wells. The other standing in another time zone, in a kitchen in Wyoming, with bad knees and white hair sprouting from his ears. I don't want to scream forever. I don't want to live without proportion, like some kind of affliction from the past. So I have to remember the second father, the one whose TV dinner is getting cold, while he holds the phone in his left hand and stares blankly out the window, where just now the sun is going down, and the last fingertips of sunlight are withdrawing from the hills they once touched like a child. And this last poem I'm going to read is it's kind of a nature poem. It's about that moment at dusk when you sort of sense that whatever the day held is now a settled matter, whether it was full of failure and unachievement like most of them, or whether it was full of work. And there's a kind of leveling out, which is maybe why they call it evening. And the light changes, and there's this kind of period of mercy, I think, between the day and the night. It's called Summer Dusk. And it's sort of about being on a porch at that time. I put in my goddamn hearing aid in order to listen to a bird that sounds like the side of a drinking glass struck lightly by a fork. And try not to hate a life that dips you in time like a tea bag over and over and pulls you up each year a slightly different color. Yet I like this hour when the air goes soft and leaves stir with relief at the end of their labor of being leaves. What a piece of work is man, I say, not knowing Hamlet said it first. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and movement, how express, in apprehension, how like an angel, and yet, to me, the quintessence of dust. This hour of the evening, with a little infinity inside, like an amnesty from the interminable condition of being oneself. This half hour, when you look out and see that it is sweet. Even in my deafness, I can hear the bird whose name I do not know speaking to someone in the dusk.